I'm Rushton McGregor, and this is SEO in 2024 Additional Insights.
Kyle, what's your additional insight for SEO in 2024?
So my additional insight is to utilize the customization features that are available in GA4 to your advantage.
Okay, what customization options are we talking about here?
Yeah, so it's a new feature that didn't exist in old analytics, universal analytics, and it's in the report section. If you're an admin or an editor of GA4, you have the option to customize the reports that you see. So that's whether you want to add in additional metrics, remove dimensions that aren't valuable. And for SEO, I think this comes into play where you want to kind of really hone in on organic traffic, you want to hone in on organic landing pages, and maybe even bring in Search Console reports. And then the customization option means that you can create an SEO report that gives you the insights you need at the click of a button, rather than scrambling around and trying to find it every month or so.
Okay, traffic landing pages, organic traffic. So obviously key metrics for SEOs. How do they go about incorporating that information then in GA4?
Yeah, so as long as you're an admin or an editor, you have the option in the top right-hand corner of reports. You'll see it looks like a pencil. Sometimes I think it looks like a cigarette, but it's definitely supposed to be a pencil. And you click on that button, up pops a customization sort of options, and you can then add in the dimensions, add in the metrics, or remove metrics that you don't find valuable. And then there's a filter option, and certainly for SEO, that filter option is key. So then you can filter by, I only want to see data where the default channel group is organic search. Or if you want to get a little bit more granular, you can say, I only want to see data where the session source medium is Google organic or Bain, or other search engines do exist. And then you'd go from there. And in your admin section, you have the option to add in collections, which you can create yourself. So you could create you could call it David's SEO report, and then you could add that collection into the report section on the left-hand side. And so it's available for you whenever you need it.
Should SEOs, all SEOs in an organization, be using the admin login for GA4, or is it not a better setup for SEOs to find some automated way of taking the data out of GA4 and analyzing it somewhere else?
Yeah, I think both options do exist. What I like to do is have that report option that's available to you in GA4, so that you're having that conversation with, whether it's a client and you're an agency or you're within an internal business, you're having that conversation about what's important to track. You can then create that in GA4. And then if you want to, in terms of visualization, you can maybe replicate those in Looker Studio. There is also the option in GA4 that if you've created a report, you can actually schedule that to be sent to yourself or a suite of users on a monthly basis. So you don't even have to go into GA4. You can then just schedule that email and it gets sent on a monthly or a weekly basis. But I think it's almost like muscle memory. It starts to kind of get the conversation going around what's important to track. Why do we want to track it? And then what information is that going to tell us about how we can then improve SEO for the organization?
I get the feeling that a few SEOs have given up with trying to become experts in GA4 because it looks so overwhelming to begin with. Is that an appropriate reaction to have?
I think it is. And I think, well, yes, it is, because I think SEOs, and this is such a broad stroke thing here, but I think change is a challenge. SEOs overall, whether it's algorithm updates or different ways to assess what's bringing in traffic and what isn't, SEOs manage or deal with change fairly regularly. So to add in another thing that's changed is quite difficult to manage. And GA4 is certainly a different way of looking at data compared to universal analytics, which had been in place since 2013. So for a lot of SEOs, they've had a decade of getting used to universal analytics, and then all of a sudden this GA4 thing comes along. But I think if SEOs get stuck into the customization features that are available in GA4 and the different ways of accessing that data, I think there'll be some light bulb moments where they're saying, oh, actually, this is really valuable. I really like this. And they'll get stuck into it more. And then slowly but surely, they'll forget what Universal Analytics was and wonder why they ever worried about GA4.
So it would be good just to delve into a little bit more detail about the specific metrics that are available within GA4. I mean, you mentioned traffic, landing pages, organic search, just to name three there. So, I mean, maybe just going for traffic. So what specific aspects of traffic should SEOs be looking at, and how should they be using that data?
Yeah, I think for me, it should always go back to the conversation that you have with either in the internal organization or, with your clients if you're an agency or freelancer. But the number one for me is conversion metric, or what is now called a key event metric. You should always be focusing on what the conversion is and what the traffic is doing once it lands on the site.
So that conversion metric, has got to be set up within GA4 as well, I presume?
Yeah, either within GA4 or within Google Tag Manager. But once you've set it up as an event, you then have to mark it as a key event. And I would always say less is more with key events. I think really try and understand what's the key business indicator, what's the really important value, whether the internal organization or that your clients are going to come to you and say, things are going great because we've seen X increase in revenue, we've got X amount more leads coming through the contact form. So that's the key metric, I'd say.
And it's easy to actually have a metric set up in relation to a purchase that happens relatively quickly after a visit occurring. But if it's a top of funnel type visit, is it still appropriate to set up a conversion metric then?
Yeah, I think so. So I've worked with a couple of, hopefully it's okay to name drop, like I've worked with Zoe Ashbridge before on a couple of her e-commerce clients where we understand that the key conversion point is the purchase. But what we've actually then done is created events and created audiences where we're understanding that people are landing onto the site top of funnel because they're reading blogs, they're getting information they need. And we're able to assess that from an organic SEO perspective, X amount of people who land on the page, who land on an informational blog page, for example, then go on to convert. And that's really useful information to say, that's the number now. What can we then do? How can we A/B test ways to drive more people to convert? That potentially means more people in, or finding better ways to drive people to purchase. So it's still a really useful metric to say, we're driving X amount of traffic and it's converting, and here's how we're going to get more people to convert for you.
And with your landing page information that you can set up within GA4, are you simply looking to match keyword phrases against the landing pages that are being discovered, found for those particular keyword phrases, and ensuring that the most relevant landing page is being served for a particular keyword phrase, or are you doing something else there?
No, I think that's right. I mean, the information that you can bring in to GA4 via Search Console, for example, will really help with that. So yeah, you'll be able to say, like, this is the queries that is driving people to this landing page. And you might ask the question, is that relevant? And if it's not relevant, then there's work to be done on page, there's work to be done with internal linking. You might ask the question, actually, I think that is relevant. It's the right keyword, but they're not potentially converting. And then you'd be asking the question about what can I do on page to drive people to convert better? And actually, I think this is where another sort of facet to GA4 that's really important is that if you're linking Google Ads data and you're driving people to the same landing page with the same, keywords that you're trying to bid for, there's information that you can glean there, which is really useful for SEO as well. Don't just kind of focus on your specific organic search SEO metrics. Have a look at the data that's available from Google Ads, for example, and it'll help build a picture about what's working and what's not working.
Yes, and I guess there will be keyword phrases that you can discover through looking at that data that you may not even be attempting to optimize a page for.
100%, yeah. And actually, once a user gets to the page, one of the enhanced measurements that's available, so it's kind of automatically tracked, is a search term report. So you can see what the landing pages people arrive at, and then you can maybe build a report to see what do they then potentially search for on the site. Because if you can see, I'm kind of building a landing page for this specific product or this specific question, and then they're searching for something that's related to that, then maybe that'll help you build out some more content on the page to help answer that query. So yeah, that's another thing to kind of utilize within GA4.
And for your organic traffic, do you have any preference with regards to comparing data to get some sense as to whether organic traffic's improving or getting worse?
Yeah, I mean, I like to both compare previous year and previous period.
As in quarter, sorry?
Yeah, so well, if you're looking at sort of the last 30 days, you could also compare the previous 30 days to that, or as you say, quarter to quarter. But I think my go-to is always the previous year, because that's then taking into account standard seasonal trends. If you're an e-commerce client and you're comparing January to December, and you're going back and saying, oh, January's traffic and revenue's down compared to December, well, obviously it's going to be because there was Christmas in December. But if you're comparing January to the January the previous year, I think you'll get some better insight about where traffic is coming from. What I also like to do, it's nice to bring into the conversation around AI overviews in Google, is have a look at what's going on with the different types of search engines that are coming in or bringing traffic in. I've seen certainly on some SaaS clients of mine or educational clients that they're seeing a much bigger increase in traffic from Bing, which comes with it its own conversations around how to optimize. Maybe there's even a conversation where you're saying, have we thought about advertising on Bing ads, for example? So yeah, and using a year perspective of that will help drive that conversation.
And are you able to track any traffic coming in from AI conversations as well?
Not at the moment. There's nothing as far as I'm aware, there's nothing that kind of helps you, in terms of like source medium that says this is from an AI overview, for example. There's nothing like that. Maybe they'll bring that in. I don't know, but it's certainly worth reviewing that. If you see a drop in traffic, and then you can, have a look at the search result itself on the SERPs and actually think, well, actually, my ranking position hasn't changed. The trend is still the same, but actually what's existing on the SERP has changed, and that's potentially why there's a drop. And again, that's a conversation to be had around next steps around how to combat that.
Is there any particular industry sector that you're seeing increases in traffic from Bing, and why are you actually seeing, do you think, increases in traffic?
Yeah, so it's interesting actually. I have quite a few education clients, so like academies or private schools, and I'm seeing traffic increases for those, but also I'm seeing traffic increases for B2B SaaS clients who are coming in from Bing. And the thing that I'm putting that down to is where they're searching. If you are somebody who's working in an industry, like a B2B industry, you may have standards or defaults set up for your computer, which you can't change. So they're using Bing and they can't change that. That's kind of what I'm seeing is those industries, that B2B SaaS, there's been a bit of an increase in Bing. And I think I'm putting it down to, there's more opportunities out there in a post-COVID world. People are starting to, businesses are starting to think about where their next sort of long-term purchases are, and they're having to use Bing's search engine because there's no other option available within their defaults within the business.
Should SEOs be using a GA4 professional to get this all set up as effectively as possible, do you think? Or is it something that they can still reasonably do by themselves?
I think they can still reasonably do it by themselves. I think, although is that, I might just put myself out of a job there. I think there's two things here. One is, can you reasonably trust the data that you're getting? And certainly in a consent cookie compliance environment at the moment, there's certainly a query about that. And then it's around, well, if the key business indicators are this, this, and this, how can I set that up appropriately so that I'm making sure that the data is correct and the actions are, the right actions based on that? So I think if there's something in the back of your mind, if an SEO is thinking, can I really trust this data? Then and that's when I'd probably lean on a GA4 professional. But I think in the world we're in, SEOs are already very technical. They're already utilizing lots of different tools. And I think learning a bit more about GA4 is a great tool to have for an SEO. So yeah, I think I'd definitely recommend getting stuck in and trying to learn a little bit more about it.
Are there any other customization options that we're likely to see in GA4 over the coming few months, or is it fairly set in stone over the next few years, do you think?
They do have a roadmap, and the one feature, it's not necessarily a customization feature, but the one thing that's coming out, I think in Q3 this year, is the ability to add annotations. And I think that was something that was really appreciated in Universal Analytics. And I think will be really useful from an SEO perspective, so that if there's been a core algorithm update, if you've made a huge change to a website, you can mark that in GA4 and then understand, potentially that's where some huge increases have come from. Great to report back on as well. Great to say we made this change on this date. Look at the huge benefit it's brought in.
You've shared what SEO should be doing in 2024. Now let's talk about what SEO shouldn't be doing. So what's something that's seductive in terms of time, but ultimately counterproductive? What's something that SEO shouldn't be doing in 2024?
Yeah, and I think I kind of alluded to it already. It's that reporting wise, let's not focus on those kind of metrics, those kind of things that we always tend to add to reports, and we always tend to talk about them, and nobody really, no business owner, no internal team kind of heeds that warning. So I think what we should stop doing is building reports that have no benefit to any audience that we're sending them to, and let's start having conversations about what's really important and building reports based on that, because I think that's going to be hugely fruitful. Cut out all the rubbish and start, getting really succinct reporting from GA4. I think that's going to be awesome for SEOs.
Rushton McGregor is a GA4 specialist at KRM Digital Marketing. You can find him over at krmdigital.uk. Kyle, thanks so much for adding your additional insight to SEO in 2024.
My pleasure. Thank you for the opportunity. Much appreciated.
I've been your host, David Bain. You've been listening to an episode of SEO in 2024 Additional Insights, a Majestic series that complements the original SEO in 2024 podcast, video series, and book. Find out more at SEOin2024.com.